Commander Veltar stood on the bridge of his warship Stellar Fang and watched the empty stars through the main viewing screen. His ship moved through the dark space near the edge of known territory, where few dared to travel. The Corvani Empire had sent him here to look for new worlds and new species to bring under their control. For 3 months, he had found nothing but empty planets and dead rocks floating in the void. His second officer, Mordan, approached him with a data pad in his clawed hands. "Commander, we have detected an unknown vessel on long-range sensors," he said in their native tongue. "The ship appears to be of primitive design and is moving on a direct course toward the Kepler system." Veltar took the pad and studied the readings. The vessel was small compared to his battlecruiser and seemed to use basic chemical propulsion instead of the advanced drive systems his people had mastered centuries ago. According to the sensor data, the ship carried energy weapons that were laughably weak and shields that could barely stop space debris. "What species?" he asked. "Unknown, sir. The ship design does not match any in our databases. Intelligence suggests it may be from the recently discovered planet Terra 3. The species there calls themselves humans," Morden replied. Veltar had heard reports about this new species during his last visit to the home world. They lived on a single planet and had just begun to explore their own solar system. The Empire's scouts had classified them as a primitive race that would pose no threat for at least 1,000 years. Their technology was basic, and their military capabilities were almost non-existent compared to the mighty Corvani forces. "Bring us alongside their vessel," Veltar ordered. "We will disable their engines and board them for standard specimen collection. This will be a simple operation." Stellar Fang changed course and accelerated toward the human ship. Veltar's crew prepared for what they expected to be a routine capture. They had done this hundreds of times with dozens of different species. Most surrendered immediately when they saw the size and power of a Corvani warship. Those that resisted were quickly overwhelmed by superior technology and training. As they approached the human vessel, Veltar could see it more clearly on the viewing screen. The ship was called New Sol according to their communication intercepts. It was indeed primitive-looking with a basic metal hull and simple design. Weapon ports were visible, but the energy signatures were weak. The ship looked like something his people had built when they were first learning to travel between stars. "Open a communication channel," Veltar commanded. His communications officer activated the universal translator and sent a standard message to the human ship. The main screen flickered and showed the bridge of the human vessel. A man with dark hair and determined eyes appeared on screen. He wore a simple uniform and sat in what appeared to be the captain's chair. Behind him, Veltar could see other humans working at primitive control stations. "I am Captain Hyun-woo Kim of the Earth vessel New Sol," the human said in accented but clear standard galactic. "State your intentions." Veltar stepped forward, so the human could see him clearly. His tall, reptilian form and battle armor usually intimidated other species into immediate surrender. "I am Commander Veltar of the Corvani Empire. Your vessel will power down its engines and prepare to be boarded. You will surrender yourselves for processing and your ship will be confiscated." The human captain stared at him for a long moment. Veltar expected fear or panic, but instead saw something he had rarely encountered: defiance. "I don't think so," Captain Hyun-woo said calmly. "This is a peaceful exploration vessel from Earth. We have done nothing wrong, and we will not surrender to you or anyone else." "You have entered Corvani space without permission," Veltar replied, though this was not entirely true. The area was disputed territory at best. "Resistance is futile. Your weapons cannot harm my ship, and your engines cannot outrun us. Surrender now, and you will be treated according to Empire law." The human captain looked at someone off-screen and nodded. "Then I guess we'll have to do this the hard way," he said. The transmission ended abruptly. Veltar was surprised by the human's response, but not concerned. He had dealt with stubborn species before. "Target their engines with minimum power," he ordered. Disable, but do not destroy. We need specimens alive. The Stellar Fang's weapons fired precise beams at the human ship's propulsion system. The beams should have disabled the engines immediately, but something unexpected happened. The human ship suddenly accelerated and changed course, avoiding most of the weapon fire. The beams that did hit seemed to cause less damage than expected. Impossible, Morden said, checking his instruments. Their ship should not be able to maneuver like that with those engines. The human vessel spun and twisted through space in patterns that defied logic. It moved like a living thing rather than a mechanical craft. Veltar watched in amazement as the primitive ship avoided shot after shot from his superior weapons. They must have hidden technology, he said. All weapons, full power. Disable that ship now. The Stellar Fang unleashed its full arsenal at the human vessel. Energy beams and plasma bolts filled the space between the two ships. The human ship took several direct hits, and Veltar could see damage to its hull, but it kept moving and fighting. Small weapon ports on the human ship opened and began firing back. The return fire was weak compared to Corvani weapons, but it was accurate. The human gunners seemed to target specific systems on his ship with precision that surprised him. Warning. Lights began flashing on his bridge as minor systems took damage. "Sir, they're targeting our sensor arrays and communication equipment," his weapons officer reported. "How do they know our weak points?" Veltar had no answer. The humans should not have been able to identify vulnerable systems on a ship design they had never seen before. Yet somehow they were hitting exactly the right spots to cause maximum disruption with minimum firepower. The battle continued for several minutes with the human ship taking heavy damage but refusing to stop fighting. Finally, a lucky shot from the Stellar Fang hit the human vessel's main engine, and it began to drift helplessly in space. "Excellent," Veltar said. "Prepare boarding parties, full combat gear, and heavy weapons. These humans seem more dangerous than expected." His troops assembled in the shuttle bay, wearing their best armor and carrying weapons designed to defeat any known defense. Veltar himself led the boarding party, confident that his elite soldiers could handle a few primitive aliens, even if they had shown surprising courage. The shuttle approached the damaged human ship and docked at what appeared to be an airlock. Veltar's troops cut through the outer door and entered the human vessel. The corridors were narrow and poorly lit compared to Corvani ships, but they advanced quickly toward what their scans indicated was the bridge. They had gone only a few meters when the first trap activated. An explosion rocked the corridor and 2 of his soldiers fell wounded. Veltar realized the humans had rigged their own ship with improvised explosives. "Advance carefully," he ordered. "Watch for more traps." They moved forward slowly, finding and disarming several more explosive devices. The humans had turned ordinary ship components into weapons and defensive systems. Engineering tools became bombs, medical equipment became chemical weapons, and even furniture had been modified to slow down the boarding party. As they approached the bridge, Veltar heard sounds of fighting ahead. His advance team had encountered the human crew and the battle was fierce. When he reached the scene, he saw something that would haunt him for the rest of his life. Captain Hyun-woo Kim stood in the corridor fighting 3 Corvani soldiers at once using nothing but a metal pipe and raw determination. Behind him, other humans had created barricades from ship parts and were holding off superior numbers with improvised weapons. A human female with short black hair was throwing containers of some chemical that burned through Corvani armor. Another human male was using maintenance tools to disable Corvani weapons, but what shocked Veltar most was not their weapons or their tactics. It was the look in their eyes. These humans were not afraid. They were angry. They fought like cornered predators who had decided that if they were going to die, they would take as many enemies with them as possible. The battle for the human ship had only just begun, and already Veltar knew this would be unlike any fight he had ever experienced. The fighting inside the human ship grew more intense by the minute, and Veltar watched his elite soldiers struggle against enemies they should have defeated easily. Captain Hyun-woo Kim moved through the narrow corridors like a ghost, appearing where least expected and striking with deadly precision. The metal pipe in his hands became a weapon of terrible efficiency as he used the confined space of the ship to his advantage. Veltar tried to understand what he was seeing. His troops wore advanced combat armor that could stop most energy weapons and projectiles. Their training was the best in the galaxy, and they had conquered dozens of worlds. Yet these primitive humans were not just holding their own, they were winning. The human female his soldiers had identified as Engineer Bo-Ra Park seemed to know every system on the ship. She moved through maintenance shafts and service tunnels, appearing behind Corvani troops to attack with modified tools and improvised explosives. She had somehow turned the ship's own atmosphere recycling system into a weapon, flooding certain sections with gases that burned Corvani respiratory systems. "Sir, we need reinforcements," his squad leader reported over the communication system. "These humans are using tactics we have never encountered. They fight without regard for their own safety." Veltar could hear weapons fire and explosions. In the background of the transmission, he ordered more troops to board the human vessel but began to worry about the outcome. Half of his original boarding party was already dead or wounded, and the humans showed no signs of weakening. Through the ship's internal sensors, he watched the human pilot Do-Hyun Lee working frantically at damaged control systems. Despite the ship being disabled, the human was somehow managing to maintain life support and even restore limited maneuvering capability. The damaged vessel began to move again, slowly but deliberately. "Impossible," Morden said from the bridge of the Stellar Fang. "Their main engine is destroyed. How are they moving?" Veltar studied the sensor readings and realized the human pilot was using secondary systems in ways that should not have worked. Attitude thrusters meant for minor course corrections were being pushed far beyond their design limits. The ship was literally tearing itself apart, but it was moving. The human vessel began a slow rotation that brought its remaining weapons to bear on the Stellar Fang. The weak guns that had seemed harmless before now targeted the docking collar where Veltar's shuttle was attached. The humans were willing to risk decompressing their own ship to trap his boarding party inside. "All troops, return to the shuttle immediately," Veltar ordered. But the humans had anticipated this. Captain Hyun-woo and his crew had positioned themselves between the boarding party and their escape route. The corridor leading back to the shuttle became a killing ground where every meter had to be fought for. Medical Officer Nari Choi appeared from what had been the ship's medical bay, but she no longer looked like a healer. She carried containers of chemical compounds that she had mixed from medical supplies. When she threw them at Corvani troops, their armor began to smoke and burn. She had turned medicine into poison with the same creativity her crewmates showed with everything else. Veltar realized he had made a terrible mistake. He had assumed the humans would follow normal patterns of behavior when faced with overwhelming force. Most species either surrendered immediately or fought with predictable tactics that could be easily countered. But these humans seemed to have no concept of impossible odds or hopeless situations. They adapted constantly during the fight. When his troops learned to avoid one trap, the humans created new ones. When Corvani weapons proved effective against human defenses, the humans changed their tactics to minimize that advantage. It was as if they were learning and evolving in real time. The battle moved through every section of the human ship. The engine room, Engineer Bo-Ra Park, had created a maze of electrical hazards and chemical traps that forced Corvani troops to advance one at a time. She used her knowledge of the ship's systems to turn every component into either a weapon or an obstacle. In the cargo hold, Captain Hyun-woo had somehow moved the ship's supplies to create defensive positions that gave his people clear fields of fire, while protecting them from return shots. The humans used every piece of equipment on the ship as if it had been designed for combat. But what disturbed Veltar most was how the humans communicated with each other. They seemed to anticipate each other's actions without speaking. When one human created a distraction, another would appear from an unexpected direction. When someone needed ammunition or supplies, another crew member would provide them without being asked. The fighting lasted for hours, and Veltar's forces took heavy casualties. His elite troops, trained for conventional warfare, struggled to adapt to the chaotic and unpredictable nature of human combat. The humans never did what was expected and never fought the same way twice. As the battle raged, Veltar began to understand something that chilled him. These humans were not just fighting for their lives. They were studying his troops and learning everything they could about Corvani technology and tactics. Even while under attack, they were gathering intelligence that could be used against his people later. Captain Hyun-woo cornered a wounded Corvani soldier, and instead of killing him immediately, he questioned the soldier about weapon systems and ship designs. Engineer Bo-Ra Park examined captured Corvani equipment while still fighting, figuring out how their technology worked. They were treating this battle as both a fight for survival and a learning opportunity. The turning point came when the humans managed to access the computer system of Veltar's shuttle. Somehow, pilot Do-Hyun Lee had connected the human ship's damaged computers to the Corvani craft and begun downloading technical information. The primitive human technology was interfacing with advanced Corvani systems in ways that should have been impossible. "Sir, they're in our computer network," his technical officer reported with panic in his voice. "They're copying our database." Veltar tried to cut the connection, but the humans had created some kind of virus or program that kept the link active. They were stealing centuries of Corvani technological advancement while simultaneously fighting for their lives. The situation became desperate when the humans began using captured Corvani weapons against his own troops. But they did not just use the weapons as designed. They modified them in real time, combining human improvisation with Corvani technology to create new and deadly combinations. Medical Officer Nari Choi took a Corvani energy rifle and somehow combined it with human medical equipment to create a weapon that could penetrate Corvani armor by targeting its power source. Engineer Bo-Ra Park attached human explosives to Corvani grenades, creating weapons with twice the destructive power. The humans turned everything into a weapon, and every weapon into something more dangerous than it had been originally. They showed a creativity and adaptability that Veltar had never encountered in any other species. As his forces retreated toward the shuttle, Veltar found himself face-to-face with Captain Hyun-woo Kim in the corridor. The human captain was wounded and exhausted, but his eyes still burned with determination. Instead of immediately attacking, he spoke. "You came here to capture us and steal our ship," the human said in his accented galactic standard. "You thought we would be easy prey because our technology is primitive and our weapons are weak. But you made one mistake." "What mistake?" Veltar asked, genuinely curious about what this remarkable enemy would say. Captain Hyun-woo smiled, and it was not a pleasant expression. "You assumed that advanced technology makes better warriors. You forgot that the most dangerous weapon in the universe is not a gun or a bomb or an energy beam. It is the mind of someone who refuses to quit." The human captain stepped aside, allowing Veltar to reach his shuttle. "Go back to your people," he said. "Tell them that humans do not surrender. Tell them that if they want a fight, we will give them one they will never forget. And tell them that this was just a small taste of what we can do when we are angry." Veltar and his surviving troops retreated to their shuttle and returned to the Stellar Fang. As they pulled away from the human ship, he watched the damaged vessel on his viewing screen. The new Sol was barely functional, its hull cracked, and its systems failing, but it was still moving under its own power. The humans had done something that should have been impossible. They had fought off a superior force using inferior technology and pure determination. They had turned a routine capture operation into a disaster that would haunt Veltar for the rest of his life. But what worried him most was not what had happened during the battle. It was what he knew the humans would do with the knowledge they had gained by fighting his troops and accessing his ship's computers. They had learned about Corvani technology, tactics, and capabilities while defending their ship. The next time humans and Corvani met in battle, the humans would be ready. The journey back to Corvani space took 3 weeks, and every day Veltar thought about what had happened aboard the human ship. His medical bay was full of wounded soldiers who spoke in whispers about the strange creatures that had fought like demons. The ship's repair crews worked constantly to fix damage that primitive human weapons should never have been able to cause. Veltar spent hours reviewing the battle recordings and trying to understand how everything had gone so wrong. The humans had used tactics that made no sense according to standard military doctrine. They had turned disadvantages into advantages and had shown a level of creativity that seemed almost supernatural. His second officer, Mordan, approached him as they entered the home system where the Corvani High Command waited for their report. "Sir, the Council will want a full briefing on the new species," he said carefully. "How should we present what happened?" Veltar considered the question. He knew that the truth would sound impossible to commanders who had never faced humans in battle. The idea that a primitive species with basic technology could defeat elite Corvani troops would be dismissed as fantasy or cowardice. "We will tell them exactly what happened," Veltar decided. "The Council needs to understand the threat these humans represent. If we encounter them again, we must be prepared for a completely different kind of warfare." The Stellar Fang docked at SciFiPrime orbital station, and Veltar was immediately summoned to appear before the Supreme Military Council. The chamber was vast and imposing, designed to intimidate anyone who stood before the Empire's highest military authorities. 5 senior commanders sat at a curved table that overlooked the speaker's platform where Veltar would deliver his report. Admiral Kethran, the most senior member of the council, gestured for Veltar to begin. "Commander, you were sent to investigate and capture specimens from a newly discovered primitive species. Your mission report indicates significant casualties and mission failure. Explain these unexpected results." Veltar straightened and began his testimony. "Honored Council, the species known as humans proved to be unlike any enemy we have previously encountered. Their technology is primitive, but they compensate with superior tactics, adaptability, and a complete refusal to surrender under any circumstances." He described the initial contact and the battle that followed, detailing how the humans had turned their own ship into a weapon and had used improvised tactics that caught his forces completely unprepared. The council members listened with growing skepticism as he explained the casualties and the strategic withdrawal. "You claim that a species with basic chemical propulsion defeated Corvani battle troops?" Admiral Kethran asked with obvious disbelief. "This seems highly unlikely, Commander." "I understand your doubt, Admiral, but I have complete sensor recordings and testimony from 40 surviving troops," Veltar replied. "The humans do not fight according to any recognized military doctrine. They use creativity and adaptation in ways that make their primitive weapons far more effective than they should be." Military analyst Zorvek leaned forward with a condescending expression. "Commander Veltar, perhaps the stress of deep space patrol has affected your judgment. No primitive species could possibly defeat troops equipped with modern armor and weapons. Your report suggests either equipment failure or tactical errors on your part." Veltar felt anger building inside him but maintained his composure. "Respectfully, analyst, I have served the Empire for 20 years without a single tactical failure. The equipment functioned perfectly. The humans won because they fought in ways we were not prepared for and adapted to our tactics faster than we could adjust to theirs." The council exchanged glances that clearly showed they did not believe his account. Fleet Commander Dracos spoke next, his tone dismissive. "Even if we accept your claims about human tactics, surely they're primitive. Technology limits their threat potential. A species that cannot achieve faster than light travel poses no danger to the Empire." "That is exactly the mistake we must not make," Veltar said urgently. "The humans may lack advanced technology now, but they learn incredibly quickly. During our battle, they accessed our computer systems and downloaded technical specifications. They studied our weapons and armor while fighting us. By the time we withdrew, they understood our technology better than some of our own technicians. Supreme Commander Velkarian, the eldest member of the council, laughed coldly. You expect us to believe that primitives learned advanced Corvani science during a single battle? Commander, this testimony grows more absurd with each claim. Veltar pulled up holographic displays showing the battle recordings and damage reports. These are the facts, Supreme Commander. The humans improvised weapons from medical supplies that could penetrate our armor. They created computer viruses that infected our systems. They used physics and chemistry in ways that turned their ship into a fortress we could not take. The council members studied the displays, but their expressions remained skeptical. Analyst Zorvek pointed to several scenes from the recordings. These images show desperate animals fighting for their lives, nothing more. The casualties resulted from underestimating their willingness to die, not from any superior capability. They were not willing to die, Veltar corrected. They were determined to live and to make us pay a terrible price for attacking them. There is a difference. Animals fight from instinct, but humans fight from intelligence and planning. Every action they took was calculated to cause maximum damage to our forces while protecting their own people. Admiral Kethrin stood and began pacing behind the council table. Commander Veltar, your report describes impossible events and attributes, supernatural abilities to a species that has barely learned to leave their home planet. Either you are suffering from some form of psychological trauma, or you are attempting to cover up serious tactical errors with fantastic stories. The accusations stung because Veltar knew it would be almost impossible to prove the truth to commanders who had never experienced human warfare. Admiral, I request permission to return to human space with a full battle fleet. Allow me to demonstrate the threat they represent under controlled conditions. Absolutely not, Supreme Commander Velkarian declared. We will not waste Imperial resources chasing phantoms created by a commander's damaged psyche. The humans will be classified as a minor threat and avoided until they develop space travel capabilities that justify Imperial attention. Fleet Commander Drakos consulted his datapad. According to our intelligence estimates, the humans will require at least 500 years to achieve interstellar travel. By then, the Empire will have expanded far beyond their reach and they will pose no strategic concern. Veltar tried one more time to make them understand. Honored Council, those intelligence estimates are based on normal technological development patterns. The humans do not follow normal patterns. They adapt and innovate at rates we have never seen before. If they have access to our technology, they could achieve interstellar capability within decades, not centuries. Analyst Zorvek made notes on his tablet. Commander, your persistent claims about superhuman capabilities suggest a condition known as enemy glorification syndrome. Officers who suffer traumatic defeats sometimes attribute impossible abilities to their opponents as a psychological defense mechanism. I am not glorifying the enemy, Veltar said with growing desperation. I am trying to warn you about a threat that could destroy the Empire if we do not take it seriously. Admiral Kethron returned to his seat and spoke with final authority. Commander Veltar, this council finds your report to be inconsistent with established military science and strategic analysis. Your claims about human capabilities are dismissed as the result of combat stress and tactical errors. Supreme Commander Velkarian nodded in agreement. Furthermore, your persistent advocacy for these impossible claims suggests that you are unfit for command positions. You are hereby relieved of duty aboard the Stellar Fang and assigned to Monitor Station Kepler 442 for the remainder of your service period. The punishment was harsh, but not unexpected. Kepler 442 was a remote outpost, on the edge of Imperial space where officers were sent when they had fallen from favor. It was essentially exile disguised as a duty assignment. I understand, Supreme Commander, Veltar replied, knowing that further argument would be useless. I request that my full report be filed in the strategic archives for future reference. Your report will be classified as unreliable intelligence and marked for review by medical personnel, Admiral Kethran announced. Dismissed. Veltar left the council chamber knowing that he had failed in the most important mission of his career. The Empire would continue to ignore the human threat until it was too late to respond effectively. He had seen what humans could do when they were angry and determined, but no one would believe him until those same humans appeared in Imperial space with stolen technology and an appetite for revenge. As he prepared for transport to his new assignment, at the remote monitoring station, Veltar looked out at the stars and wondered how long it would take for the humans to prove him right. He hoped it would be long enough for the Empire to prepare, but he suspected that Captain Hyun-Woo Kim and his crew would not wait centuries to settle the score. Monitor Station. Kepler 442 was exactly what Veltar had expected, a small outpost at the edge of nowhere with minimal crew and outdated equipment. The station orbited a dead planet in an empty system that served as an early warning post for potential threats to the Empire. It was the perfect place to exile an officer whose reports had embarrassed the High Command. For the first year, Veltar performed his duties without complaint and tried to put the human encounter behind him. He monitored long-range sensors, filed routine reports about empty space, and attempted to rebuild his reputation through quiet competence. The work was boring, but it gave him time to think about what had gone wrong during the battle with the new soul. The second year brought the first disturbing reports from other sectors. Deep space patrols began encountering evidence of unknown technology in previously unexplored systems. Ships found metal fragments that did not match any known species' manufacturing techniques. Some patrols reported brief sensor contacts with vessels that seemed to use modified versions of Imperial technology. Veltar read these reports with growing concern, but said nothing to his superiors. His warnings about humans had already destroyed his career, and he had no desire to be labeled as paranoid or delusional. He filed the reports in his personal database and waited for more evidence. The third year brought confirmation of his worst fears. A routine monitoring sweep detected artificial radio signals from the direction of human space. The transmissions were encrypted, but the signal patterns matched those he had recorded during the battle with Captain Hyun-Woo Kim and his crew. The humans were not only still active, they were broadcasting across multiple star systems. Veltar spent weeks decoding the signals using techniques he had learned during intelligence training. What he discovered kept him awake for days. The humans had not remained confined to their homeworld as Imperial intelligence had predicted. They had established colonies in at least 12 different systems and were expanding at an incredible rate. The decoded transmissions revealed that Captain Hyun-Woo Kim had been promoted to admiral and now commanded a growing fleet of human vessels. Engineer Bo-Ra Park had become the head of something called the Advanced Weapons Division. Pilot Do-Hyun Lee was training other humans in combat flight techniques. Medical officer Nari Choi led a research group studying alien biology and technology. But the most disturbing information was technical in nature. The humans had not simply copied Corvani technology, they had improved it. Their ships now used hybrid drive systems that combined human engineering with stolen Imperial designs. Their weapons were more efficient than original Corvani versions. Their defensive systems incorporated new materials and techniques that the Empire had never developed. Veltar realized that the humans had done exactly what he had warned the Council about. They had used their encounter with Imperial forces as a learning experience and had built upon that knowledge to create superior technology. In just 5 years, they had advanced from primitive chemical rockets to interstellar vessels that could challenge Imperial supremacy. The monitoring station's communication array allowed him to intercept more human transmissions over the following months. He learned that the human expansion was not random exploration, but a carefully planned military buildup. Admiral Hyun-woo Kim was establishing strategic bases throughout the region and training crews for what appeared to be an eventual confrontation with the Corvani Empire. The humans had not forgotten their first encounter with Imperial forces and they were preparing for revenge. But they were not simply planning to defend themselves, they were getting ready to attack. The broadcasts spoke of liberation campaigns and the creation of a coalition of species that had suffered under Imperial rule. Veltar tried to warn his superiors through official channels, but his reports were either ignored or dismissed as the fantasies of a disgraced officer. He sent detailed analysis of the intercepted transmissions to the High Command, but received only form responses acknowledging receipt of his communications. Growing desperate, he began to compile a comprehensive intelligence package that documented human expansion and technological development. He included sensor logs, decoded transmissions, and strategic analysis that painted a clear picture of the growing threat. The package filled several data storage units and represented months of careful work. When he transmitted the package to SciFiPrime, the response was swift and humiliating. Admiral Kethron personally sent a message ordering him to cease what she called obsessive behavior regarding a non-existent threat. The message made it clear that any further reports about humans would result in removal from duty and possible court-martial for insubordination. Veltar realized that the Empire's leadership was so committed to their original assessment that they would ignore any evidence that contradicted their position. They had classified humans as a minor threat 5 years ago and would not admit that their analysis had been wrong, even when faced with proof of human expansion. The 6th year brought the first reports of human contact with other species in the region. The intercepts revealed that Admiral Hyun-woo Kim was negotiating alliances with races that had been conquered or oppressed by the Corvani Empire. The humans were not simply expanding their territory, they were building a coalition of enemies that surrounded Imperial space. Bora Park's Advanced Weapons Division had developed new technologies by studying the biology and capabilities of different species. They created adaptive armor that could protect against multiple types of weapons and universal translators that allowed instant communication between allied species. The humans were becoming the technological leaders of an anti-imperial alliance. The intelligence that worried Veltar most concerned human psychological warfare capabilities. Nari Choi's research teams had studied Corvani biology and had developed non-lethal weapons that could disable Imperial troops without killing them. The humans intended to capture as many enemies as possible rather than simply destroying them. This suggested that the humans were planning something more sophisticated than simple revenge. They wanted to defeat the Empire so completely that resistance would become impossible, and captured troops would provide intelligence about Imperial defenses and tactics. The 7th year brought the first direct confrontations between human forces and Imperial patrols. The encounters followed the same pattern Veltar had experienced years before, Imperial forces expecting easy victories against primitive enemies, only to discover that the humans had turned warfare into an art form. The reports that reached Veltar through official channels described these encounters as minor incidents with unidentified raiders. The High Command refused to acknowledge that they were dealing with an organized human military force. They classified the attacks as piracy or terrorism and responded with standard anti-raider tactics that proved completely ineffective. But Veltar's intercepted communications told a different story. Admiral Hyun-woo Kim was conducting what he called education missions designed to teach Imperial forces that the old rules no longer applied. Human ships would appear without warning, disable Imperial vessels with minimal casualties, steal technology and intelligence, and disappear before reinforcements could arrive. The humans were systematically mapping Imperial defenses and capabilities, while demonstrating their own superiority. They were not trying to conquer territory. They were preparing for a larger conflict by weakening Imperial confidence and gathering intelligence. Do Hyun Lee had become the master of what humans called impossible maneuvers, using gravitational fields and stellar phenomena to hide ship movements and create tactical advantages. His pilots could appear from directions that should have been empty space and vanish into regions that sensors could not penetrate. The human fleet grew larger and more sophisticated with each passing month. They had somehow developed manufacturing capabilities that allowed them to build ships faster than Imperial intelligence believed possible. Their vessels incorporated technology from dozens of different species, creating hybrid designs that were more versatile than any single species craft. By the 8th year, Veltar had documented a complete transformation of the strategic balance in the region. The humans had gone from a single damaged exploration vessel to a multi-species coalition with advanced technology and superior tactics. They controlled territory that stretched across dozens of star systems and commanded loyalty from species that had never cooperated before. The most disturbing development was the human approach to captured Imperial personnel. Instead of executing prisoners or using them for slave labor, the humans studied them. Narichoi's teams learned everything they could about Corvani psychology, culture, and military organization from captured troops. This information was being used to develop propaganda and psychological warfare techniques specifically designed to demoralize Imperial forces. The humans understood that defeating the Empire's military would require breaking the will of its soldiers, not just destroying their equipment. Veltar realized that the humans were preparing for total war against the Corvani Empire. They had spent 8 years building strength, gathering allies, and studying their enemy. The war began exactly as Veltar had predicted it would, suddenly, simultaneously, and in ways the Corvani Empire was completely unprepared for. Human forces struck at 17 Imperial installations across 3 sectors on the same day, using tactics that turned every advantage the Empire believed it possessed into a weakness. Veltar watched the first reports come through his monitoring station's communication array and felt no satisfaction at being proven right. The destruction was overwhelming, and the Imperial response was chaos. Fleet commanders who had dismissed his warnings years before were now sending desperate messages requesting reinforcements and tactical advice. Admiral Hyunwoo Kim had orchestrated the opening moves with the precision of a master strategist. Human and allied forces did not attack Imperial strongholds directly, but instead targeted supply lines, communication networks, and support facilities. Within hours, entire sectors were cut off from high command and forced to operate independently. The human approach to warfare had evolved far beyond what Veltar had witnessed during their first encounter. Bora Park's Advanced Weapons Division had created new technologies that could disable Imperial ships without destroying them. Captured vessels were immediately converted to serve the human coalition, turning the Empire's own strength against itself. Du Hyun Lee's pilots had mastered combat techniques that seemed to defy physics. They used gravitational anomalies, stellar, radiation, and even the vacuum of space itself as tactical weapons. Imperial ships found themselves trapped in situations where their superior firepower meant nothing because they could not target enemies who fought like living extensions of the cosmos. But the most devastating aspect of the human attack was psychological. Narichoi's research into Imperial culture and military psychology had created propaganda weapons that shattered morale more effectively than any physical assault. Imperial troops surrendered not because they were defeated, but because they no longer believed victory was possible. The humans broadcast messages throughout Imperial space that contained detailed information about Corvani military capabilities, tactical doctrines, and strategic planning. They knew things about the Empire that only the highest levels of command should have known, proving that their intelligence network had penetrated every aspect of Imperial society. Within weeks, the war had spread throughout the outer territories of the Empire. Species that had been conquered centuries ago rose in rebellion when human forces provided them with weapons and tactical support. The careful structure of Imperial control collapsed as subject races remembered their freedom and chose to fight. For it, Veltar received emergency communications from HFY ordering all monitoring stations to prepare detailed intelligence reports on human capabilities and strategic intentions. The irony was bitter. The same commanders who had ignored his warnings for 8 years were now demanding information that only he possessed. He compiled everything he had learned about human expansion, technology, and military doctrine into a comprehensive briefing document. But instead of sending it through normal channels, he transmitted it directly to the Supreme Military Council, with a cover message that reminded them of his original testimony and their response to it. The reply came within hours. Supreme Commander Velkarian himself ordered Veltar to report to HFY immediately for emergency consultation. The Empire's leadership had finally realized that the disgraced officer they had exiled might be the only person who understood the enemy that was destroying their civilization. The journey to the home world took 2 weeks, and Veltar spent the time monitoring battle reports that grew more desperate with each transmission. Human forces were advancing on multiple fronts using tactics that Imperial doctrine could not counter. More importantly, they were liberating rather than conquering, turning former Imperial subjects into enthusiastic allies. When Veltar arrived at HFY, he found the capital in a state of barely controlled panic. The orbital stations that had once projected Imperial power now bristled with defensive weapons as the leadership prepared for attacks that might come from any direction. The confidence and arrogance he remembered from his last visit had been replaced by fear and uncertainty. The Supreme Military Council convened an emergency session to hear his briefing. The same officers who had dismissed his warnings years before now listened with desperate attention as he explained everything he had learned about human capabilities and intentions. "The humans are not simply trying to defeat us," Veltar explained to the assembled commanders. "They are trying to replace us. Every species they liberate becomes part of their coalition. Every Imperial world they capture is transformed into a base for further expansion. They are not conquering an empire, they are building a new form of galactic civilization." Admiral Kethron, older and more haggard than Veltar remembered, leaned forward desperately. "How do we stop them? What weaknesses can we exploit?" Veltar considered the question carefully before responding. "Admiral, I do not believe the humans have military weaknesses in any conventional sense. They adapt too quickly and learn from every encounter. But they do have one characteristic that might be turned to our advantage." "What characteristic?" Supreme Commander Velkarian demanded. "They prefer to capture rather than kill their enemies," Veltar replied. "The humans seem to believe that former enemies can become allies if treated with respect and given the opportunity to choose. This suggests that they might be willing to negotiate rather than fight to the bitter end." Fleet Commander Drakos laughed bitterly. "You suggest that we surrender to primitives who were using chemical rockets a decade ago?" "I suggest that we acknowledge reality," Veltar responded calmly. "The primitives you describe have defeated our best troops, captured our most advanced technology, and built a coalition that spans half the galaxy. They are no longer primitive, and they were never as weak as we believed." The discussion continued. For hours, as the Council tried to find some way to salvage Imperial power from the disaster they had created by ignoring the human threat. Various strategies were proposed and rejected as reports continued to arrive, detailing fresh defeats and territorial losses. Finally, Supreme Commander Velkarian made the decision that ended the Corvani Empire as a galactic power. "Commander, Veltar, you will return to human space as our official representative. Your mission is to negotiate terms that will preserve what remains of Imperial civilization. The assignment was both an honor and a form of exile. Success would rehabilitate Veltar's reputation, but failure would make him the scapegoat for the Empire's collapse. Either way, he would be the officer who formally acknowledged that the humans had won. The journey to human space took him through territory that had been transformed beyond recognition. Former imperial worlds now flew the flags of the human coalition, and their inhabitants worked together in ways that had never been possible under imperial rule. The rigid hierarchy and species-based discrimination of the empire had been replaced by cooperative networks that maximized the capabilities of every member. When Veltar's ship finally reached the human capital at New Geneva, he was escorted by a squadron of vessels that included ships from a dozen different species. The pilots who guided him to the orbital station were the same humans he had fought years before, but they greeted him with professional courtesy rather than hostility. Admiral Hyunwoo Kim met him personally at the docking bay. The human had aged in the 11 years since their first encounter, but his eyes still held the same determination that had impressed Veltar during the battle aboard the New Soul. "Commander Veltar," he said in perfect Corvani, "I remember you well. You fought with honor during our first meeting." "Admiral Kim," Veltar replied, "I have come to negotiate terms for the surrender of the Corvani Empire." The human leader smiled, and this time the expression was genuinely warm rather than threatening. "Not surrender, Commander. Partnership. We learned much from our encounters with Imperial forces, but the most important lesson was that former enemies can become valuable allies when treated with respect." The negotiations took place in a conference room that overlooked the human capital world. Veltar found himself working alongside representatives from dozens of species, including some that had once been bitter enemies of each other. The humans had somehow created a system where cooperation was more profitable than conflict. Admiral Hyunwoo Kim explained the terms that the human coalition was willing to offer. The Corvani Empire would be dissolved, but its member species would be invited to join the coalition as equal partners. Imperial technology and knowledge would be shared freely in exchange for Corvani participation in the new galactic community. Most importantly, there would be no punishment for the leaders who had started the war. The humans understood that revenge would only create new conflicts and preferred to focus on building a better future for all species. The final agreement was signed in the same conference room where Veltar had first met the coalition leadership. As he attached his signature to the document that ended the Corvani Empire, he reflected on the journey that had brought him to this moment. 11 years before, he had been a confident Imperial commander who expected easy victory over a primitive species.